You are now watching Lesage, the best place to learn about competitive Pokemon TCG. Let's get it! Yo, what's poppin' YouTube? Welcome back to the channel, Lesage here. Yo, today we're going to be going over the top 10 best decks of December week 4. So we got a lot of movement this week, and even if some decks haven't moved too much, we do have a new deck list, including a new take on Mew VMAX, so be sure to check that out. If you haven't already subscribed to the channel, be sure to subscribe to the channel, and check out the pinned comment below for all of the deck lists, along with reference videos for most of these decks as well. We got a lot of ground to cover today, so let's jump into our number 10 spot, see exactly where we're starting off. Starting off strong at number 10, we have Gengar VMAX. Gengar VMAX is a type of deck that's it's kind of fluctuated all throughout the entire metagame. I've actually really enjoyed playing Gengar, and I've been a huge advocate for this deck. But the deck has definitely slipped due to lack of play, and I think it's because players don't necessarily follow the patterns of what's going on with the metagame. So Gengar being what I think is the best Dark-type deck that we have in format, I think it's much better of a Dark-type deck than we have with Rapid Strike, Urshifu, GALARIAN, MOLTRES, for example. I think it has a lot of opportunities to see success against Mew, and with Path to the Peak, it seems like it could have success against DURALUDON and ZACIAN, and it holds its own against a lot of decks like JOLTEON and Ice Rider, and even Single Strike Urshifu VMAX, because the weakness doesn't necessarily matter if you're going 2 prize cards for 2 prize cards. The strategy of this deck is to use Single Strike Roar, accelerating Single Strike energies to your Gengar VMAX, and either attacking with Fear and Panic or GMAX Swallow Up. Path really helps out against DURALUDON VMAX, Mew VMAX for sure, and Dauntless Shield on Zamazenta V. I did add Shauna in here. It's a card that I know a lot of people are probably going to ask about. It's really just the next best supporter that we have that's not necessarily specific. Bruno wouldn't necessarily work out here with Path to the Peak. If we had Tower of Darkness, it'd be a different story. Caitlyn doesn't really work out too much. Zinnia's might be a little bit too high roll for the early game. So Shauna's just the next kind of vanilla supporter that we have. We'll see if this deck continues to go up a little bit. We've had a lot of top placements, including a number 3 late in the week from Gabe Smart. So maybe that will kind of boost this deck up, and we'll see with the late night event coming up tonight. And the invitational as well. So I think Gengar could move up. If anything, it is moving up, and it was always pretty close to the top 10. I don't necessarily think it's going to spike up too much because players are obviously not going to play the deck that much, but it does come to the point where I think Gengar VMAX can definitely shoot up to like a number 7 spot if I ever had to say something. I personally put this deck within the top 5 decks in format. I'd put this deck at a number 5 personally, but my list is based off of numbers and results. A lot of people are always asking, what does the CP mean? The CP is basically the tracked results. So I track events between 4 players to 500 players and give different kind of values for first, second, top 4, top 8, top 16, top 32. And some of those are applicable, some of those are not, obviously depending on the size of the event. So this deck has earned 140 CP based off my calculations. Here we are at number 9, jumping up a spot from number 10 last week is this GALARIAN MOLTRES Hoopa deck. We've seen a little bit of success from this deck in the past. I know that Ross Cawthon's been playing it at a few events, won a couple events with it, and it seems like now it's better to play it because Mew VMAX is everywhere. If Mew VMAX is out there, play a Dark deck. So with you being a single prize card attacking Dark deck, you're probably going to beat Mew. You're probably going to beat other few decks. Sure, you're going to lose to Rapid Strike, Urshifu VMAX, and Jolteon, but here's where we're at. The goal is to really hit your opponent's Pokemon with Assault Gates on Hoopa, very similar to a Rapid Strike Urshifu VMAX's Gale Thrust, using Tapu Koko as a pivot point. After you've done a little bit of chip damage here and there, and your opponent's drawn enough prize cards, you can go GALARIAN MOLTRES, drop that Moltres down to your bench, attach a few energies, and Fiery Wrath your opponent for 20 plus 50 for each prize card they've taken. Quick Shooting Inteleon can definitely help fill in those gaps, Shady Dealings can search things out, and Clara allows you to kind of loop this over and over again. So I think a deck like this, it's like, just kind of, it took over as the best single prize card deck. So no surprise here, it's going to be the top single prize card deck this week. Malamar is not in our top 10 this week, but stay tuned for my video that I put up every single Tuesday at noon that features decks 11 through 20, the decks that are just outside of the top 10. And it's a lot of it's closer to, you got to look at the CP amounts and see where they vary on a week by week basis. So a lot of decks were just out by like one placement or they had a top 16 instead of a top 8. It gets pretty close sometimes, so stay tuned for that. I think that being said, a deck like this is okay. It obviously has some inherent flaws with JOLTEON seeing a lot of success and there being a few Rapid Strike variants in the metagame, and we even see other Rapid Strike variants popping up that just don't play Melony or Galarian Moltres. So I'd say that this deck's cool, probably the best single prize card deck that we have right now, and it's just doing some numbers. If you want a good counter Mew that's relatively budget, I recommend playing this one. I'd say if it's going to stay anywhere, it's going to be the 7, 8, 9, 10 spot. If not, it could barely fall out of the top 10. Here we are at number 8, and jumping down a spot from number 7 last week. This deck is doing okay. Rapid Strike Urshifu VMAX is of course a very successful deck, a very strong deck, but when you look at its glaring psychic weakness, and Mew has so far been dominating our format, it's really one of those things that I don't know if you want to be playing a deck like this. That's not to say that it can't win against Mew. We have a Galarian Moltres V in there for reasons, but as a Mew player, I've never lost to this matchup because this deck is just two incomplete decks sandwiched together. So it's not that I don't like this deck and that I don't think it's a valid concept. I think it's cool, and I think it's currently the better way to play Rapid Strike Urshifu VMAX if you want to have a fighting chance against Mew. But it is one of those games where I'm just not necessarily feel like it's something's wrong with this deck, and I don't know if it's the correct build. I mean, I think this is the best version that's been working well for me. I've seen other versions of this deck that play Rapid Strike Urshifu VMAX with Galarian Articuno and Galarian Moltres V and no shady dealings. I don't like that version. I do not think that version is nearly as successful as this one, but it is one of those things where you gotta ask yourself, if Mew's the best deck and you're trying to beat the second best deck in the format, this might not work out. If you want something that's dark and fighting, maybe play Single Strike, because at least those decks are tied together a little bit more. So I just think that this is a worse version of Single Strike in terms of what it's trying to do coverage-wise, and it's a worse version of Rapid Strike Urshifu than other more straight-up variants. So it kind of, that's the reason why it's so low, but it is successful enough where it is making the top 10, so there's really nothing wrong with that. I just would try to play something a little bit more tighter going forward. I think that this deck might eventually fall out of the top 10. If it did not have that second place finish at the Late Night Series number 19 event, I think that this deck would have likely, it would have been like number 10 or something like that, based off of my numbers. So we'd have to see how it goes, but it is one of those things where deck has been performing. If you do like this deck, there's nothing wrong with it. There's just nothing inherently right with it either. At number 7, we have Rapid Strike Urshifu VMAX with Melony. So very similar to the last one that we saw with the Moltres, we have the more straight up Melony version. So you can see they're very similarly ranked. If you combine both of these decks, they'd be much higher up, but they are very different in their core. One's playing dark energies and Galarian Moltres, one's playing Melony energies and water energies. This one plays Octillery. I think this version that Tord came up with a few months ago, and it's since been popularized by some other players who've been playing actively online. This version with Metacham and the Passimian and the Telescopic Sight works particularly well in this format, as long as you don't hit Mew. I think the deck has a chance to beat Mew, and there's ways to cheese Mew out of games, but this deck is just, I just don't think it's well positioned in this current metagame. However, if you are looking to play a Rapid Strike deck, I do think this is the better variant overall. I think the other one's better positioned against the metagame. I think this is a way better deck. If Mew was not in the format, for example, this would be probably the best deck in format overall. So that's one thing that you got to keep in mind, is that as decks change, there's ways to ways for decks like this to sneak in. So the strategy is really just Melony accelerating energies to the Galarian or to the Rapid Strike Urshifu VMAX, slapping on a Rapid Strike energy and attacking with Gmax Rapid Flow over and over again. You can increase that damage output with Telescopic Sight and Passimian, and search things out with Octillery and Shady Dealings. So overall, I think this version's really cool. It plays out pretty smooth. Again, just really watch out where it is in terms of decks seeing success. So decks like Mew being up top, certainly not going to be great for this deck, because they are just going to get that double damage knockout on a Rapid Strike Urshifu VMAX, and things like Mellow, but I can really target them down a lot. And that's just going to be the way that our format's going to be playing out for the next little bit. However, if Mew does get countered out of the format, and we do see decks like Gengar pushing themselves up, and Baby MOLTRES and JOLTEON, this could easily be the best play for those types of events. So stay tuned for that. I think this deck's going to stay relatively within the 7, 8, 9, 10 spot. Hopping in at number 6 and falling a spot from last week at number 5, we have Turbo ZACIAN with Zamazenta. I think my friend Josh Sutherland is really the player that's pushing the boundaries of this deck week after week. It seems to be the only deck that they play, and they're one of the only players that's seeing this level of success with the deck. Now, this deck seems to be going down a little bit in popularity just because it doesn't necessarily have the greatest Mew matchup, Jolteon matchup, single strikes really back and forth. I think it struggles against Duraludon sometimes, and Mirror is obviously an issue. If you're facing a bunch of Rapid Strike Urshifu decks or Ice Rider, you're doing pretty good, but even builds with Baby Moltres seem to be popping up, and Gengar with Path to the Peak seems to be popping up a little bit too. So as we look at these decks in the meta game, I think Turbo ZACIAN is looking to go down a little bit, and I think that's really like this is the first step dropping down a spot. Players are going to be like, oh, okay, maybe it's not as successful, play it a little bit less, etc, etc. The goal of this deck is to use Intrepid Sword, accelerate energies, and draw cards, and then attack quickly with Brave Blade against your opponent's Pokemon V or any Pokemon, bringing them up with boss's orders. You also have Metal Saucer, Raihan, and Metal Energy kind of attack really quickly, Primate Wisdom, Rotom Phone, to put cards you want on top of your deck and then swap them with Primate Wisdom. And of course, if you hit a VMAX deck, you could chill there with Dauntless Shield on Zamazenta V. I think this is the type of deck, again, it's really good for newcomers. I think this is a great deck if anyone's trying to enter the game. It is one of those things where I don't necessarily see it staying. I mean, it's probably going to be like a 5, 6, 7 spot. I think that's probably appropriate for this deck, but it could fall out of that as well if we just have slight metagame shifts. So I think it's the metagame shifting. I would not recommend anyone to play this deck. I do not think it's as well positioned as we've seen before, although it is a fairly successful deck. At the halfway point at number 5, jumping up a spot from last week as well, we have Ice Rider CALYREX VMAX with Inteleon. I think this is a pretty solid build of the deck, utilizing Melony to accelerate energies to Ice Rider CALYREX VMAX, attacking between Ride of the High King and Max Lance, choosing do you want to hit your opponent because they have a big bench and maybe try to aim for a 2-shot, or do you go with Max Lance with some quick shootings, try to get a 1-shot? I think the Crushing Hammers and Fan of Waves make this deck pretty well positioned against Mew and Jolteon and Single Strike. However, I do think this deck would struggle to Duraludon and Ice Rider. Maybe not Duraludon so much, but it could. I'm not sure. I actually haven't played that matchup, so let me know in the comments what you think about the Duraludon versus Ice Rider matchup. If you have any experience tonight, I'd totally love to hear your opinion. And if there's any decks that you want to talk about in the comments as well, I get back to every single person's comments. So put something in there. Let me know what you think. Just be like, yo, Zach, how's your week going? What's going on? I love to talk to everyone. That being said, I think this deck is kind of the definition of just being neutral. It doesn't really do too much. You're just accelerating energies and choosing between 2 attacks. So it's pretty aggressive. You have Crushing Hammer, Fan of Waves, and Marnie as some kind of mid-range control elements. I could see this deck playing Path to the Peak. I really think that that's a card that we could just put into this deck. However, it is something where there is a lack of space when it comes down to it. So that's something that I could see in future iterations of this deck. Again, I think that this deck is like a 4, 5, 6, 7 deck. It's that real middle, and it can kind of edge either way. You can see it moves up a spot, it could easily move up another spot, or go down 3 spots. We'll have to see how next week really treats it. Hopping in at number 4 and staying from number 4 last week is Duraludon VMAX. I've changed my list up a little bit to mimic Cal Connor, one of my testing partners' decks. And they've kind of went with the Avery Team Yell Towel version, which I think seems cool. I'm still not necessarily a huge fan of Avery, but I do see how it could have some mid-range control elements against decks that have larger bench sizes. The goal of this deck is to use Skyscraper to really fend off decks that play special energies, and if you do face against decks that have basic energies, you can take them away with Crushing Hammer. Flannery is a way to get around Path to the Peak along with Crystal Cave. And we have some mid-range control elements from Avery, healing elements from Crystal Cave, increasing your HP with Big Charm. And of course, Team Yell Towel also heals as well. You're going for that 2-shot anyway, so Team Yell Towel seems to be working out okay here. I really think that this is the type of deck that just like, this is where the top 4 kind of gets really solidified. For the past few weeks now, Duraludon shot up out of nowhere, reached number 4, and it's just staying there because it's just a better version of Turbo ZACIAN, if you have to ask me. It has more of that control element, that more of a lock element. It's not as aggressive as Turbo ZACIAN, but you don't need to be aggressive in this format if you stop a lot of decks. So I think Duraludon really stops a lot of players who just don't necessarily understand how to play against it, or their decks aren't properly equipped to deal with it. And I think this is the type of deck that, I think it's a top 5 or up deck going forward. We'll have to see if some metagame changes because Duraludon has only been out for a few weeks, but again, I've said this a few times, I think that Duraludon, we're looking for that proper list. I don't know if this is it, and I don't want to be like, hey, I don't put out the best list out here. I work my butt off to put out the best list for the community. These are all my personal lists, and if they're not my personal list, then they are from the best players in the game. If I can't come up with something better, of course, I can put a list out here from another player and credit it. But these are decks that I've all been testing, and I non-stop play Pokemon. Duraludon, I just can't put my finger on it. I'm waiting for like the next iteration of this deck. Maybe Team Yell Towel is really going to be it. And that's, it does advance this deck a little bit, but we'll have to see. I think Duraludon VMAX is just top 5 or up. Still working on this build. We'll see how it goes for next week. Number 3, we're getting up there, and also previously number 3 is Single Strike Urshifu VMAX, Umbreon VMAX with Houndoom. So the goal of this deck is Single Strike Roar, accelerating those Single Strike energies to either your Single Strike Urshifu VMAX or your Umbreon VMAX. Choosing between your attackers there, I think it's one of those things where really finding which one's going to work. I think that Umbreon V is very good against Mew decks. I think that Single Strike Urshifu VMAX is great against ZACIAN and Duraludon, and also just like any kind of VMAX decks. Single Strike Urshifu V is strong against Gengar decks and Jolteon decks. And Morpeko's a great measure against Mew. If you Single Strike Roar twice to it, you could add 4 damage counters on it. Explosive Discontent can do 160 to a Mew with the boost from Single Strike energy. This is my personal list for the deck. I think this is the type of deck that's just been seeing success. I think it's been the 3rd best deck for maybe a month now, and I think it's just going to stay there. So kind of like what I was saying, Rapid Strike Urshifu VMAX with GALARIAN MOLTRES just doesn't seem to compete with this deck in terms of placement, in terms of synergy, in terms of anything. So when you're going between both decks, and I think this is just a better version of that deck. I know they're very completely different decks, and the only thing that's common between them is they share the Urshifu name. But when you're going between a fighting and dark deck, this is just a better version to play because Houndoom and Single Strike ties it together a lot more. Basically, from my list last week, I took out the Scroll of Scorn. I don't think that's necessarily as relevant anymore, whereas Tool Jammer has become more relevant just against things like Duraludon and ZACIAN and stuff like that. So I think just the minor changes are great. If you are looking to pick up any of these cards, you can go to PTCGO put in code ZLesage5 to save 5% on your next order of codes. That link is also in the description. It does help support me as a creator. So if you're picking up codes anyways, consider going to PTCGO Store to help me out. That being said, I think Single Strike is going to stay within the top 5, if not just the top 3. Going forward, it's pretty cemented at this point. Here we are at number 2, the runner-up deck, and also at number 2 last week is Jolteon VMAX. The goal of this deck is to use Max Thunder Rumble by doing 100 damage to your opponent's active and doing 100 damage to their bench if they have a damage counter. You can get that damage counter with Inteleon's Quick Shooting or with Zigzagoon's Headbutt Tantrum. I think that's really the core strategy of this deck. You have Scoop Up Net to make some of those things happen again and again, and Shady Dealings is the backbone of this deck. You got Cheryl to heal if you need to, because Elemental Badge reduces your energy attack cost, and it does not get discarded like the energies from Cheryl. So you could really discard one energy, not the Elemental Badge, slap on another energy and attack. Path to the Peak Marnie allow this deck to have some mid-range control elements, and this deck has been fairly discovered for the past while. And like most of the other decks in the top 4, this deck has been the 2nd place deck for the past month or so, and I think it's not necessarily going to change too much either. Even though we have quite a few fighting decks and other decks that might counter Jolteon VMAX within the top 10, this deck, similar to Mew, is just so good that players are willing to look past that and seeing success with it. If you look at the CP, This deck is almost twice as strong as Single Strike. It's almost the same as Single Strike and Duraludon put together when it comes to those kind of placements. So I mean, Jolteon VMAX certainly seeing success. I really don't see it moving from a number 2 spot, considering this deck has those new promo boxes that came out with the Jolteon V and Jolteon VMAX. That may be a great place for players to kind of get started with building this deck. So if you are looking for a present or a gift to give the Pokemon loving fan in your family or some kind of friend, Jolteon VMAX seems like it's it. If not, there's lots of other great decks to choose from. I don't really see this deck moving too much, and again, it looks like it's going to be good in the next format as well from the leaked cards from Brilliant Stars, so keep that in mind that these decks have some kind of staying power in the metagame as well. Jumping into our number 1 spot, and also at number 1 last week, is Mew VMAX. The whole strategy behind this deck is that you could use Cross Fusion Strike, copy your Fusion Pokemon's attacks in play, and that could be Psychic Leap on a Mew V, that could be the Techno Blast on a Genesect V, that could be a Melodious Echo on Meloetta. Those are really the big attacks that you're going to be using. You could also use Max Miracle to go through anything like Zamazenta V, Decidueye, Duraludon. You get the point. The goal is you just have so many different things that you could be doing with this deck. Name one deck that has attacks that go through anything, copies all these different attacks. The built-in Fusion Strike system, ability to draw cards for each of your Fusion Strike Pokemon in play, accelerating energies, gusting up whatever you want, grabbing cards out of your deck, energy denial, more gust, ways to get cards back from your discard pile, and blocking your opponent's abilities. I mean, I think that this is really what makes Mew the best deck, is it's not a single one of those things, it's a combination of all of them. And this is my current take on the deck. It's a little bit more different than more builds that we've been seeing. I have not been liking Great Ball as much as other players. I think that Pokeball, the flip, might be worth the benefits because you could kind of search out whatever you're looking for. And with enough coin flips, you're bound to get heads. And that was really the theory behind this deck. Crushing Hammer seems like it's a card that you could usually waste early on in the game because your opponent has energies, and if you could set them back, sometimes Mew's just like a little bit behind, and then you could just use Crushing Hammer, really jump forward in the game. Pokemon Catcher is a great way to just kind of gust up something after you play Elza Sparkles, giving yourself options, and it is again a wastable card because a lot of times Mew doesn't care about what you knock out. Old PC is an interesting card. I've tried builds with up to 4. I currently like this build with 1, just to give yourself that chance to get something back. If not, it is just fodder for Fusion Strike system. A lot of these cards, they might not work like Pokeball, but it does thin your hand out 1, so you could draw more cards with Fusion Strike system. I don't see a world where Mew changes. Mew has more CP than Jolteon, Single Strike, and Duraludon all combined. Or if not, it's very close. It's one of those things where Mew is so far the best deck in format that if you're not playing Mew, you got to find a really good reason not to play Mew. So if you, again, I do want to put it out there that I do have code ZELASAGE5 at PTCGO store. It does save you 5% off your order. If you're looking to pick it up online, by all means do that. If not, maybe play a deck that counters Mew like Gengar and GALARIAN MOLTRES or something like that. And that's what we got going on here today, peeps. Hopefully you enjoyed watching through this video, learning more about the top 10 best decks in format. And I do cover these videos every single Monday at 12 p.m. Eastern, so noontime Eastern, or wherever it is in the world for you. I cover them the same time every single week, so stay tuned for that. I know Fusion Strike might seem a little bit stale to some. I think there's a lot of movement, as we can see with Mew VMAX changing its deck up week after week after week. I think it's there's a lot to be said about that, and I think we could dive into that a little bit more. So I'll be here to cover it every single week. I hope that everyone's enjoyed this video. Again, the lists are in the description, so be sure to check that out, or not the description, the pinned comment. Check out the pinned comment below with all the decks, the reference videos, all that great stuff. Stay tuned for a great week of Pokemon content. I'll catch up with all y'all later. Peace out. Have yourself a great one. I truly appreciate you taking the time out of your day to watch this video. It means the world to me. And my goal with this channel is to spread my love of the game and knowledge with our entire Pokemon TCG community. If you haven't already, help signal boost this video to other Pokemon TCG fans by liking it, sharing it with your friends, and subscribing to the channel. Hopefully we reach our goals really soon. Check out this recommended video, and have yourself a great day. Thanks.